Hey fellas, I don't know if you know this, but I like video games.
Loser! You're a loser!
And as such, I've played quite a fair share of video games that have, you guessed it, bosses. You see, there's an art form to making a video game boss, as you need to be able to take into consideration multiple factors: where the boss is in the game, what the boss can do, and what the skill level the player is going to need to be getting at it. If you throw a boss that's way too tough at a new player near the beginning, you're going to get tons of journalists writing articles like how Crash Bandicoot Remake was comparable to the Dark Souls games, or how you need to include a skip the boss button. Yep. Those things did happen. If you've been around my channel a while, you know that I tend to enjoy myself a fair amount of video games, and I frankly want to take some time to talk about a certain aspect of games. And what better topic than bosses? After all, bosses are essentially a test of skill to see where the players are at, so if you just straight up suck, well, that's your problem. Get back in there and do your best. Ganbare! That being said, let's talk about first boss fights, since they are the thing that will essentially test the basic skills of a player and inform them on how bosses will work in a game. Spoilers for the list of games that are on the screen right now. Thanks, Ada. And no better example I can think of is that of Hollow Knight. The False Knight is probably one of the best first bosses in a game I've played. Not only does his design have this slight intimidation factor due to the sheer size of this guy, but his attacks help the player out in several ways. When you're fighting False Knight, the game showcases a number of its core gameplay features that you'll have to consider for other boss fights. The first of which is learning when to strike when you heal. If you don't have the proper timing for when you want to do either of these, you're going to get smacked upside the head. The False Knight also teaches the players that you need to pay attention to the wind-up and animations to the boss. You can see this aspect be reflected in Blade Wolf from Metal Gear Rising. Now, maybe it's just me, but whenever I think about video games, I think it's a staple that you actually pay attention to what the bosses are doing and pay attention to them if you don't want to get yourself sliced up in two with a chainsaw. Developers will often assume that you're actually, paying attention to what's on the screen, and if the kick-ass music of "I'm my own master now" ain't enthralling enough to grab your attention, then I think that's more of a you problem than anything else. Bosses are small tests of skill to make sure the players understand the mechanics and can make it all the more enthralling for people to engage with the game's controls. In more action-oriented games like Metal Gear Rising and going into the Metroid Prime series, the animations are done extremely well so the players can watch out for the telltale signs of enemy attacks. Granted, there's more fun ways for bosses to interact with the gameplay. Metroid Dread is actually a pretty good example of this. Like, if you manage to sequence break and get the bombs early, you can actually kill Kraid instantly in the second half of the fight. Well, I wouldn't want that sort of thing for every boss, since not only would that wear off the novelty, but I can imagine that'd be something that not every player can do. Still, being able to Shine Spark to kill experiment number Z57 is also very satisfying, and it makes the boss more memorable if you just killed this bastard in an unconventional way. Still, I suppose we should talk about bosses that, while not terrible, do have issues. Take for example Shadow Yukiko from Persona 4. There's quite a steep level challenge if you're not ready for that. Difficulty curves are common in games, most notably RPGs that have a traditional turn-based combat and level system in it. Hell, there's a reason why a lot of people cite Brock in the original Pokemon as an interesting case depending on which game and which starter you choose. If you were like the suckers who picked out Pokemon Red and decided to go with the fire lizard that was splashed all over the box, congrats! You're gonna be stuck fighting a heavily defensive type that resists all your starter's attacks, and you won't have access to a Pokemon that can have a neutral damage type to it. Now, if you got Pokemon Blue and still chose Charmander, you'd still have access to Butterfree, which could get a Psychic move that could get over Brock's physically defensive Pokemon. But not Pokemon Red, baby!
Are you feeling sorry for yourself?
Oh well, at least you don't have to worry about fighting the same boss over and over again with slight variation. Not like the Imprisoned from Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Like, yeah, it's an infamous boss so bad I don't even have to talk about the specifics of it. Other than you had to stop to fight the big guy from getting out of the hole on the ground, and you need to stop him 3 times at different points in the game. Repetition can be one of the worst things to do, especially when it's for a boss fight that doesn't really have anything interesting to go with it. It's also part of the reason why I don't care for most of the actual dungeon bosses of Breath of the Wild. The Blights aren't all that intriguing and can be really easy to beat, with only one actually giving an actual challenge with the Thunder Blight Ganon, which requires you to use the Magnet effect to use his own attacks against him. That isn't to say that fighting the same boss can't be fun nor enthralling. Take the Kuze boss friends from Yakuza 0. You fight the guy a total of 5 times against Kiryu. each of them very tough fights, with the first one being a wake-up call boss. Quite literally, Kuze will tell you that he's on a different level than the mooks you just plowed through, and unless you know how to proper guard, dodge, style switching techniques, he'll push your shit in. And while you do fight him 4 additional times, Yakuza 0 does so much gameplay content and other bosses in between that you won't even notice the repetition of his boss fights. Though in the fact that there are very subtle changes with this fight, such as the second fight where he's armed with a pipe, and eventually you'll be able to get to let loose on items on the ground to attack him. Speaking of wake-up bosses, getting back to Blade Wolf, as I stated in my video on the bosses of Metal Gear Rising, which you should totally watch, cause come on guys, that needs more views. Shill. He's also a wake-up call boss. A boss that tests the players to make sure they at least understand the basics of the game mechanics. If you don't know how to parry, watching your enemy's attack animations, or learn how to use your blade mode properly, Blade Wolf will wreck you in half. I mean, it's not like learning how to jump in Cuphead tutorial level difficulty, but then again, I'm not a game journalist who's rated his brain to be uber progressive. Not every boss needs to be mechanically strong, you know. You can have a memorable boss for narrative reasons. Hell, one of the best bosses I can think of for this is Chaos from Sonic Adventure. It's literally the first thing you do in the game when you start Sonic's story, where you fight a boss. Even before the player can even get a chance to use the controls of the game, you're flung into a boss fight. Normally, this is something that would instantly be a bad thing, but Sonic Adventure's controls are simple and quick to pick up, and it's like the game doesn't give you any leeway to mess up. The moment the fight starts, you're given 2 rings that'll prevent you from actually being one-shotted by the water monster, who took me 12 years to realize is actually a echidna shape with a brain sticking in it. You have to be a total dink to lose to this boss.
I guess when he's doing an attack, oh, I died.
Now I want to turn the mic over to my editor, because he's also an avid gamer with experience with other games that I do not have.
Hi, the editor here, just chilling in Limsa Laminsa, the hottest hangout in Eorzea. Recently, Final Fantasy XIV came out with its 6.1 update, which added the ability to play every base game dungeon and boss in single player with computer-controlled allies. Perfect if you just want to take your time and enjoy the story, or even to skip the DPS queues. Along with this, several duties were completely rehauled to better fit the design philosophy of 14's more recent expansions. Nothing exemplifies this more than its endgame. The final dungeon of A Realm Reborn, the Praetorium, is infamous among longtime warriors alike due to its sheer length and abundance of unskippable cutscenes. Runs of this dungeon will always take at least an hour, and half of it is listening to villain monologues. Thankfully, as of 6.1, it's been split into 3 separate duties: a more abridged dungeon with the first boss fight, the main encounter with the Ultima weapon, and a single-player instance for the final encounter. Originally, the Ultima weapon, which was the game's big scary story MacGuffin, wasn't that memorable of a boss fight. It was at the end of an endless slog and was overall pretty piss easy. Out of my way too many runs of the Praetorium, I don't think I've seen anyone die on it once. But now, with 6.1's rehauls, Ultima Weapon is easily one of the best boss fights in the game. One amazing change off the bat is the expanded role of the Primals. The Ultima Weapon is powered by these powerful beasts you fought throughout the main story, but never made anything more than subtle appearances in the original fight. Now you have a mini-boss rush gauntlet where you must dodge souped-up versions of their original attacks before your guardian Hydaelyn takes them down one by one. And that's only Phase 1. Phase 2 occurs after you survive what is essentially the epicenter of a nuclear explosion, and now you're fighting for your life in the center of
such devastation.
This is basically the final exam of the base game, testing your knowledge of boss mechanics you'll be seeing for the rest of the expansions. Something which was drip-fed to you through the other rehauled 6.1 bosses. There's even some non-standard visual cues you need to pay attention to, as well as clever uses of the boss corralling you into unsavory spots. The most clever trick of this battle, though, is that even though the mechanics are complicated, you do have a lot of wiggle room as a newer player, though these attacks are
devastation.
None of them outright kill you if you make a mistake or two. It's enough of a warning to get you paying attention without being too unfair for this early in the game. As icing on the cake, you're given a free level 3 limit break to use at the end of the fight as Ultima Weapon charges up another nuclear attack. The tension and satisfaction of this moment is the perfect end to a much improved final boss fight. The 2 boss fights surrounding Ultima Weapon are brilliant as well, though I don't want to spoil them too much for those who haven't experienced them. If you're on the Ether Data Center, I reside on Siren, and I'm usually playing as this hunk of a himbo you see right here, Tim Fruskungranther. And, if any of this has intrigued you, I'm happy to announce that the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV has a free trial and includes the entirety of A Realm Reborn and the award-winning
And in case you're wondering why I'm using this accent, well, Mystery on you, folks! There's a lot of different kinds of bosses, and hey, who knows? If this video does well, I'd love to talk more about the topic of bosses in the future, cause hey, the Metal Gear Rising videos where I talk about the bosses have been fun to do, and you guys seem to like them. So let me know about the bosses you guys like, and tell me what makes them good bosses, or tell me what makes them bad bosses. I'm MangaKamen, thanks for giving me your time, and I'm walking here!